we're just starting to see, in particular, an explicit perspective on diversity from a human factors standpoint.
Welcome to HFIG Talks, a podcast produced by the Human Factors Interest Group at the University of Toronto. HFIG is a student chapter of the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society at UofT and consists of students, faculty, and local professionals who are interested in the field of human factors. My name is Kayla, and I'm the current Vice President of HFIG. I'll be hosting this episode of HFIG Talks, part of our series where we speak to professors in the Human Factors Research Group at the University of Toronto. Today's interview is with Professor Greg Jamieson, who runs the Cognitive Engineering Laboratory. If you missed it, you can catch our last episode with HFIG's faculty advisor, Professor Mark Chignall, wherever you listen to podcasts. And with that, let's jump into today's episode with Professor Jamieson. So, can you tell us a bit about your journey to becoming a human factors prof at UofT?
Well, I guess the question is, how far does the journey go back? Most relevant, I guess, in my mind, I was an engineering student and I was bored being an engineering student. I was bored of just sort of learning physical principles and laws and equations and stuff. And so I was very fortunate to have a friend who was also in engineering at the University of Illinois. And he was participating in this dual degree program where people in engineering could go over to the Faculty of Arts and Science and pick up a second degree in arts and science. And so it was all very well supported, laid out, structured by the two faculties. And he was doing engineering and philosophy. And I thought, oh, well, gosh, that's a lot more interesting in my mind than engineering. So I went and I took a look, and I noticed that psychology was in the list, and I thought that was really interesting. I thought I might like studying psychology. That'd be, kind of would probably spark my interest. And when I started that, when I went to sign up for it, the counselor in psychology said to me, "Oh, so you're going to do engineering psychology?" And I said, "Yeah, engineering and psychology." And he said, "Well, you realize that that's actually a thing, right?" And I was like, I had no idea, right? So I was not in industrial engineering, so I hadn't taken any human factors. I knew nothing about it as a discipline. And he said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact," he said, "there were some people or at least one person from that department, from the psych department, that was doing a seminar that evening. And maybe I would want to go check it out." So sure enough, I went. And it turned out I went to a seminar that included Chris Wickens from Illinois, Neville Moray, who was then at the University of Illinois in engineering. So Chris Wickens was in psychology and Institute of Aviation. And they were being visited by Jim Reason and Jens Rasmussen. And
That is serendipity.
Yeah, no kidding. And they gave a talk. And bear in mind, I'd never heard anything, and I didn't know who any of these people were. And I didn't meet Rasmussen again, by the way, until I was a PhD student. So that was, and I didn't meet him then, actually, now that I think about it. I didn't meet him that day. So they talked for about an hour and a half. The student group put on this talk. The HFES student group at Illinois put on the talk. And so I was just absolutely blown away by what they were talking about. And at the end, they had sort of pointed out, well, these are the two people from Illinois, and this person is from the Institute of Aviation. This person is from Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. And I said, well, that's where I am, so I'll go talk to him. And so I went down after the talk, and I met Neville Moray, who then turned out it was a very serendipitous time for him too, in the sense that I think he knew he was leaving the institution, but not many other people did. And so he wasn't taking students. So he had room and he had time to spend on an undergraduate student. And sure enough, he brought me into the lab, and I had a chance to work with him and met people like Penny Sanderson and Patty Jones, and grad students who stayed colleagues of mine throughout my career. And it was just sort of a remarkable introduction. And then literally sitting around the lab, I saw a dissertation written by Kim Vicenti, who had been a student of depends on who you ask, who his supervisors were. But John Flack, Penny Sanderson, Neville Moray, and also was following up work that John Lee had done. So I learned about those two people. I ended up doing an internship for John Lee after I graduated at Battelle in Seattle. And then I ended up getting introduced to Kim Vicente at a Human Factors conference and ended up becoming his graduate student. And I don't know, is that enough of the story? Do we need to go any further than that?
I mean, I think that traces a pretty kind of like a lineage kind of through human factors with the Rasmussen and Vicente and kind of
there was a lot of name
Sanderson. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, you know, it was just, I was so fortunate to get exposed to all of these people at an early point in my life, and people who were willing to entertain my interest and my ignorance. And just involve me in excuse me, in things that they were doing, that their graduate students were doing. And it was very, very fortunate.
Well, and having one of your first introductions to the field be someone as prolific as Wickens is pretty fortuitous.
I took a course from Wickens shortly after that. I took the Wickens course from Wickens, which was fantastic, wonderful learning experience. And I got involved in the student group, the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society student chapter at Illinois, and then ended up through that playing soccer with Chris Wickens. So yeah, we played soccer together a bunch of times. So yeah, it was a great opportunity to meet those people and see them as you know, sort of fully rounded people who had interest in things beyond their academic lives. So, yeah.
Well, I guess we have our Illinois counterpart, HFIG's counterpart at Illinois, to thank for one of our faculty members here at UofT.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's always good motivation to keep our speaker series going.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, can you maybe tell us a bit more about what your lab does now that you're here at UofT, what the focus is?
Whatever we can get people to pay us to do. That's part of it. No, we're interested in how people use automation, generally speaking, in any environment that is safety critical, production critical, mission critical. So we're very interested in how people are using automation generally to make decisions, where those decisions have steep consequences if you perform them poorly. And so mostly our work has been in between either the production facilities, which could be power production, sort of continuous process control, so like oil and gas, chemical, petrochemical settings, and then also in military applications as well.
Are there any projects you can maybe just give us like a quick example to?
So in the lab, perhaps the one that is most sort of been front of mind for me most lately is the one that you're working on with me, that Sean Kortschott had started looking at adaptive interfaces and using machine learning based classifiers of attentional state. And once establishing that attentional state can be identified with a reasonable level of reliability, trying to think about how we can use display design interventions to try to move people from an undesired attentional state to a more desirable attentional state. So that was work that Sean started in our first collaboration with a Toronto-based company called Uncharted Software. And that ended up leading to another collaboration that we did that several other students worked on, related to virtual and augmented reality in navigation and using ultimately using augmented reality to navigate through urban environments. So that's been a characteristic of our research, is that the majority of it has been conducted in partnership with industry partners who have brought or helped us to identify problems that they were interested in seeing solutions to. And so that's where your project, which is no longer directly connected to an industry partner, sort of has its origins in that sort of collaboration between academia and industry.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that often surprises people outside of human factors is that there's a lot of work that can be done in human factors that kind of spans many different fields, like jumping from aviation to military to cybersecurity. That's something that not many other fields do. So kind of taking that cybersecurity contract and turning that into a military contract is interesting.
Yeah, so I've actually always been a little bit wary about the ease with which human factors practitioners and researchers move their ideas from one application to another, from one discipline to another. I've seen at times that migration of ideas into domains that I know, and recognize that those ideas which make sense in one area don't make sense in the domains that I'm more familiar with. And so I'm wary about being a propagator of that as well. So I try to be a bit cautious about thinking that the ideas that arise from work in a particular domain that I'm knowledgeable about, that I would be always cautious about bringing those ideas to a new domain. And so we have in our lab over the years had the opportunities, the invitations to go work in other domains, healthcare being perhaps the most common and most visible aspect opportunity that we've consistently turned down, simply because I don't know anything about medicine and I don't know anything about healthcare. And surely I could learn, but I've always had the fear that, that the academic imperative to produce new knowledge and publish, that I would be under a lot of pressure, my students would be under a lot of pressure to create something in a space that we don't really understand, and that could have negative consequences. So I've always been a little bit conservative on that in that regard.
That's definitely an interesting insight, and just as a member of the lab, interesting to know. Yeah. So pivoting a little bit now to current day, looking back on the current day and in the past year, can you tell us a bit about how the lab's operations and your research have been affected by COVID?
The most obvious and immediate effect has been the suspension of all human subjects research. So one of my students, one of your lab mates, Adam Reiner, was quite close to being ready to collect data on the third experiment from his dissertation. Had spent, can't say exactly, but probably the better part of a year designing, implementing, pilot testing an experiment that we were probably within a couple of weeks, maybe a month of running, and then that all just got stopped. And so other work has suffered from the same constraint. So we've had projects that were expecting to do in-person data collection have moved online. We've had projects like yours where we just decided very early on that it was going to be online. And that turned out to be a prescient decision. We've had other students who have simply had to suspend their work because we could not see a path forward for those projects without being able to do human subjects testing. So COVID's been a real challenge for that. It's also been, the university has made it clear to us that it's pretty much the last thing that they expect to be back up and running. So we know that that's not going to happen soon. I'd be surprised if we're doing in-house human subjects testing in 2021. I suspect we won't see it until the next calendar year. And so that's certainly been the biggest impact. A less pronounced impact is just the drastic slowdown in our interaction with industry partners. They're under a huge amount of pressure in facing COVID from a business operations perspective, and research is not really at the top of many people's minds right now. So we have, in part, this is in part because we've decided over the years to keep our domain selection relatively narrow, and the domains that we've been working with a lot are domains that are largely impacted by what's going on with the COVID economy. So it's been slow. It's been quiet, and in a way, that's been a nice thing. Having this excuse to slow down a little bit has been nice, but at the same time, it's there is really an inertia that comes with a research program, and I'm becoming increasingly mindful that the inertia has spun down, and we need to spin it back up again. And so that'll be a challenge that we'll be facing, certainly, as this year goes on.
Right. And I mean, you did just mention that, you stayed away from healthcare, and that's kind of the one area where research is being funded right now.
Well, I mean, I actually can't comment on the funding in that area because I'm just not aware of it. I am aware that some of the work, like if you look at the work that Farzan Sasangahar is doing with COVID and isolation and the impacts of that on mental health. There are other people who are doing similar work. I've always been also a little bit wary about the flavor of the month. So I'll kind of shy away from things until I feel like I'm confident that it's a good research space. There's a lot of work going on in COVID and human factors now, and I'm not sure that I know how much new knowledge it's creating versus how much it's sort of an applied science response to a situation that we're collectively in. But that's the time will tell. We'll answer that. So I also have been aware, I have close colleagues working at the Healthcare Human Factors Group at the University Health Network, and have gotten sort of some insight into how they've been able to directly apply human factors thinking in things like setting up vaccination centers or testing centers. And that's great to see, not as much from a research perspective, but from an applied perspective, that people who are familiar with healthcare applications and healthcare human factors have been able to respond very quickly to the situation and make good contributions to responding to the pandemic.
Right. COVID has certainly upended the status quo in the past year, but there have also been other important changes in the world, especially with respect to social justice and equity. You've been on the hiring committee within the department to find a new human factors faculty member. How has the renewed momentum in equity impacted the hiring process?
So essentially, what's been on my mind a lot lately is in the course of trying to hire, of executing a search, that in a context where we're at a university that has extraordinary diversity in the backgrounds of the students that we're teaching, and yet being also in a setting in engineering in particular where we have a pronounced underrepresentation, particularly of Black and Indigenous people, and wanting to have a positive impact on that. And then when an opportunity comes up to hire, we as a committee have put the effort into making sure that we run an equitable search. And that has meant reaching out to, in the States, and sort of like the Indigenous facet is not as pronounced as it is in Canada. And so many of the people that we've talked to have been people that we've talked to about the underrepresentation of Black scientists in the human factors discipline. And so I went into that process quite ignorant about what the state of the world was. and really only had some just sort of, from my own personal experience and exposure and knowing people, but also in not having been to human factors conferences very often in the last number of years. I kind of didn't know where we were, and learning that from the perspective of a lot of our Black colleagues, we're not in a great position as a discipline. That we're not only are we not only do we suffer from this underrepresentation, we also, and this is sort of my secondhand compilation of the feedback that I've gotten from many people that I've spoken to, is that we're not doing enough to encourage it. And so when you go to run a search and you set this objective of trying to find those candidates and include those candidates in the search and in the deliberations, they're very difficult to find. And then that causes you to reflect on, well, why is it difficult to find these people? And the answer is because we've probably not been doing enough earlier on in the pipeline to create the space for them to work in. And so we've been really, really lucky in the sense that we've gotten great input from colleagues, and we really value the insight that they've given us. And it's really driven us, I think, to ask ourselves what we can do differently, because clearly we have to do something differently, because the pipeline of creating the next time we hire, it was 10 years ago that we hired last in human factors. And it'll probably be at least another 10 years before we hire again in our department in human factors. And after this search.
Yeah, I think that's a really important consideration, especially given that, you want to sustain this energy and this movement that's kind of been kicked up within the last year of a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion, but right. Keeping it in something as sustainable as hiring practices.
Yeah, and the hiring practice comes so far down, the process of thinking about, like, what is a Black or an Indigenous, go back to high school or something like that. It's like, that's, where the interest in science and technology, and then, for human factors and human behavior, sort of, originates, and then trying to support those people and their interest through high school, and then into university, and then through university, and then into graduate school, and then from graduate school into choices about their career options. And so, thinking about where we would want to be from, 10 years down the road to have a fully representative applicant pool, we'd have to start that years ago already for a hiring a decade from now. What I will reflect on, though, is what makes me feel like that effort is, have a great deal of confidence that effort will be rewarding, is the fact that human factors has always been a different place with regards to one type of equity, and that is towards women. One of the things that Neville Moray told me is, so bear in mind, when I started in the field with Neville Moray and his then wife Penny Sanderson, was that right from the beginning, there were these perspectives based on sex right from the beginning in human factors for me. And then going to conferences and having like the realization of how many leading thinkers there were already at that time in human factors who are women. And so that balance, I think, and not to say that it's like, I don't mean to imply that it's always been an equitable place, an equitable space, but that there have been many, many women there as leaders, as thought leaders in the space. When I joined the faculty, our department, there were 3 women on faculty. Today there are 14. And that's so in the 18 years it took us to go from 3 to 14. On the industrial side, I'd say probably, I'd have to go back and look more carefully, but half the hires we've done in the last decade have been women. And in that success, to me, it's very salient in how much healthier our department is, how much nicer it is as a place to be, how much more interesting that the variety of research, that the perspectives that are available is so much richer now. And so, and I have the benefit of having seen it go from 3 to 14. I want to see that same thing happen with Black and Indigenous people in our faculty. And it's going to be really, really difficult to achieve it. But it's having watched what we've achieved over the last 2 decades, and what benefits it's brought, just gives me a great deal of confidence that we're going to enjoy the same benefits, if not more, out of getting our representation right in that regard as well.
Well, I think that's certainly a needed kind of perspective. Keeping an eye on the future and the development of the field is not just the topics that we talk about, but also who's bringing those topics to the table.
Yeah, and I think there's also, like, now we're just starting to see, in particular, an explicit perspective on diversity from a human factors standpoint. That it has a particular meaning as human factors practitioners and scientists, and that's exciting to me. I'm interested in seeing where that goes. I think we've heard from Enid Montague lately, this idea that we can actually use technology, use human-centered technology to advance our EDI objectives. And that's not a perspective that I had a year ago. Like, that's not a way that I thought about this problem a year ago. And so simply the fact that that's out there now, that it's something that we can think about and contend with and use as a tool to address this problem is really exciting to me.
Right. And I mean, we already have the language for it, right? Like in human factors, we say it's applicable at all levels of a complex socio-technical system. So, addressing those earlier systemic barriers is something that we, in theory, should be focusing on, since we say we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's what's really, exciting, again, listening to Enid, is like, I don't have to learn any new methods, right? I don't have to change what it's not what I know that I need to change. It's the insight that I have and where to apply what I know. That's new, and hopefully can gain traction, and maybe if we do another podcast episode some years from now and you ask me what we do in my lab, that could be an answer to the question.
So you mentioned kind of not going with the flavor of the month, as you put it. Mm-hmm. But are you seeing any trends in human factors research over the next few years? Are you seeing any directions in your particular subspecialty that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I think it's going to become everyone, I think, will give a similar answer to this question. Artificial intelligence and machine learning applications are, I think, for those of us who are a little bit older, we recognize that this is not the first time that AI has had a surge and threatened to become the thing that would dictate the course of our lives. But this one does feel different than the earlier ones. I think that we're at a point now where these technologies are widely supported by applications that are in the hands of reasonably knowledgeable people, excuse me, spread across a lot of different disciplines. And for that reason, I think you're going to see this evolution of, I think of it as an evolution of automation technology, of decision support technologies. And I think that there will be a sustained multi-decade phase of research in human factors that will involve the interaction of decision makers with these tools, and the depth and the richness of that design problem is very profound and extraordinarily interesting. It's certainly a very multidisciplinary problem, that's going to challenge people in computer science and engineering and psychology, and then all the application domains where we're trying to put put applications based on these technologies into operation. So yeah, I think we've been paying attention to this in our research. I expect we'll continue to, and I know we'll be in good company with a lot of other human factors people working on similar challenges.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And I guess just before we wrap up, any final thoughts, comments, anecdotes you want to throw in?
Oh my. I would say that, and I don't know if I'm different from other human factors people like this, but as a human factors researcher, I go through phases, so vacillating between thinking that we are working on the most important thing to thinking that we're just, I don't even know like what derogatory phrase to attach to it, but that we're kidding ourselves that we're doing anything of use whatsoever. It's sort of an intellectual imposter syndrome at times, distributed across not just myself, but across a whole discipline, a whole academic endeavor. And yeah, I go back and forth, and it hasn't changed in the, now it's going on, I don't know, what year is it now? 21. So it's been like, I've been at UofT since 2002. This is my 19th year here, plus several years of grad school and internships and undergraduate training before then. So let's call it 25 years of being involved in the discipline. And that going back and forth between thinking we're doing something incredibly important and we're having a really big impact versus thinking that we're just we're kidding ourselves. And so that's been the reality of my career. And I've never really had a sense of whether other people share that. I don't know. I don't even know what to call it. That anxiety, that conflagration of self-confidence and anxiety about what it is that we do. So yeah, I'll just sort of put that out there. That's my closing thought. But yeah, I'd be interested to know.
Well, that's perhaps a great call out to the folks listening to this podcast. Let us know. This is a great time to plug the HFIG social channels. Let us know. Message us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. Send us an email. We'd love to get input on that for sure.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time today.
My pleasure. It's fun to participate in a very new approach to reflecting on our discipline. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of HFIG Talks, and thank you to Professor Jamieson for the interview. Stay tuned for our next episode in the series where we speak to another faculty member in the Human Factors group at UofT.